This is Legal Luminaries. Join us as we delve into the inspiring stories of some of the greatest legal minds to have shaped South Africa's democracy and law. I'm Iman Rappetti, your guide through the series. Hello, and welcome to the Legal Luminaries podcast. Allow me, Iman Rappetti, to take you on a journey illuminated by South Africa's leading legal minds, those who have trailblazed and opened the doors to a host of outstanding minds in the legal profession, and who through their own courage and wisdom and experience really indelibly shaped our justice framework. So in this podcast series, we are celebrating the achievements, the reflections on their impact, and we are looking to the future in terms of the legacy that they have left. We'll be in conversation with a series of proficient legal minds in South Africa, and I'm excited for you to join us on this journey. So I'm very pleased also that today our very first guest is Judge Bernard Ngoepe, who is South Africa's former tax ombudsman, and some of you may know him if you've ever had to go down that particular path, but Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Chairperson of the Appeals Board of the South African Council for Medical Schemes, former Judge President, would you believe it, of both the North and South Gauteng High Courts. And I have his book with me on the table, recently published, his debut book, Rich Pickings Out of the Past, which is, if you read the book, it is all about Judge Bernard Ngoepe's intention to make sure that we learn the lessons from the past and we don't commit repeat tragedies by not paying attention to what has gone before. And of course, it is a sermon for transformation in South Africa. So let's get straight into it. And I'm so delighted to be in conversation with you today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So we're going to make it fun because people could be listening to this podcast when they're doing the ironing, when they are just trying to decompress, maybe taking a long journey. So I would love for us to really do a sort of conjuring in our conversation, Judge Ngoepe, by painting some of those pictures for our audience. And I think a beautiful picture emanates from where it all began, where you grew up in Limpopo, of course, in those days, Petersburg, as a young herdsman. What were you learning and imbibing from your environment and from your elders?
Well, let me also start by saying that picture you're talking about does not peculiarly belong to me alone, of course. It's proudly shared by many other people with a similar background. And I'll be happy if somebody could wake up from where they are and say, here I am in the rural areas. Here I am, I'm looking after cattle. Here I am, I'm a head boy. And looking at that guy, there's no reason why I cannot be somewhere else in life. And I want them to understand that it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter where you grew up, it doesn't matter what your background is. What matters is yourself to decide to make a better life of your own self. That's where I started, that's where I came from those humble beginnings.
Yeah, but let's go in a little bit deeper, right? Because if you are sitting there and the four walls of your existence are literally the earth, the sky, the fields, the herds, and your family, and oftentimes in those scenarios, poverty, this leap into a future of possibility that you were able to make may not be something that someone in that situation can contextualize or even contemplate. So share with us just some of those experiences that you had that made you think that the world was bigger than where you were.
You know, when you grow up, you obviously are faced with certain challenges and the like. The area in which I grew up, obviously there was no electricity, there was no running water. People were actually really suffering to survive. And when you attend school, you say to yourself, I want to attend school, I want to do ABCD in order to prepare for myself a better life. And challenges, those as they may be, those difficulties, in a way, they inspire you. We are talking about inspiration, about things that drive you to saying, and I remember telling this to somebody else, I don't want my children to come and grow up in the circumstances in which I'm growing up, where they will have to run to go and fetch water with a bucket on their head like my sisters did, where they will have to go and fetch water from the wild like my mother did, and that sort of thing, and so forth and so on. Or a collective of all those circumstances are the real inspiration that inspire you to say, I want to get out of this situation. Not only for myself, but for my children, and if possible, on a certain level, for other people as well.
You were lucky enough to have the support of your parents, and they left some very important lessons for you to follow and to build on, which you've kept with you for the entirety of your life. But in that context, you also rely on the greater community as your extended family, in a sense. that perhaps is one of the missing pieces in South Africa today.
It absolutely is. And as I say in my book, there are certain values that were inculcated in us as we grow up, not only by your mother or your grandmother, your father, but by the community as well. By the way, a child was brought up by an entire community, and the entire community would participate in bringing up that child and molding that child up into a better person. And they would do so as a matter of common practice, a common good. And we would all succumb to the teachings and wisdoms of people who were not our own parents, but were people, elderly people in the community, because you would know that they would not misguide you. You would know that they would teach you what was right, and so on and so forth. So it was a collective communal task to make them to be better people.
And that's why I'm so delighted about the book, which I've read, and I've had the privilege of having conversations with you about it, is that you go into that detail, and it is such an inspiration for the very point we're making, that you are and can be more than your circumstances. But you then embarked on this amazing legal career over many years, and you've made a huge impact on the legal edifice in South Africa. We always go back to the primary question. What made you want to be in the law?
You know, that decision, of course, obviously, to study law obviously came late, because as you grow up, primary school, high school, you don't even know that there's anything such as a lawyer, particularly if you grew up in the areas in which I did. But, well, take a step back before I answer that question. You needed to pass your, as they described it, junior certificate at the time, your matric at the time. And at that time, the drive is not that you want to become a lawyer, because that is too distant for you and obscure. The good thing is, and I'm really talking to the young children of today, take your education seriously. Have this inspiration in you. I want to pass my grade 1. I want to pass my grade 3, and so on and so forth. All of those grades, each one of them is an important step in your life. It's an important milestone. Take that education seriously. Primary, secondary, high school, and then it will catapult you to another next level, which is university. Now, when you are at matric and the like, that's when you begin to see the world a little bit, and you begin to say, what am I going to do beyond this? And that's when I decided to say, oh, well, you know, I think I want to become a lawyer. What made me that? Simple things. For example, I think when we grew up, there used to be a program on the Springbok Radio where they talk about adjudicating the cases and the like. And I can't remember the exact title of the program, but you listen to that program. There were people who were talking, arguing about the law, and then they would pass judgment. And I think it made me feel interested in that. But perhaps really the issue was bigger than that. At that time, at a certain level in life, you become conscious of the politics of the country. That happened when we were in matric, of course. You say in my book, I mentioned a sad episode about the death of H.F. Verwoerd. I was in Form 4 at that time. And he said it was a sad thing to do. I look back now as an adult person. But we're at Hebron Training Institution in Pretoria. You know that we did a wrong thing as students at the time. We actually celebrated the death of Verwoerd. We're in matric at the time. It's not the right thing to do, but I mention it because I wanted to make 2 points. That the government at the time never really appreciated the depth of our hatred of apartheid, to the extent that we celebrated the death of somebody, of a human being, because we viewed him as a champion of a system we disliked. Now, at that time, I make that point because I want to illustrate to you that at that time I was beginning to realize the wrongfulness in the country, the oppression, the persecution of black people. And I said, well, maybe if you study law, you could help a lot of people about this.
This is so interesting because it raises 2 things. And I had a running coach once who said, don't think about the 40 kilometers. Focus on the step ahead of you, especially when you're going uphill. Look down and watch your feet and make that distance. And that's a sermon in not understanding how the fuller picture is going to play out. Focus on what you can do right now. And the other is just in that consciousness around the country, the sense of duty that you had to have and how that becomes triggered by our environments. It really is a call to action for anyone in any circumstance who wants to feel empowered about doing something to actually go ahead and do it, not to always lament the fact. For legal students, you're fresh-eyed, you're going into university and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to study law and I'm going to make a difference, whether it be in human rights or in climate change. That journey from study to actually going to the bench and deciding to go to the bench is something I would love for you to share with us, how you make that transition.
From being
from
lawyer.
When you enter into the university doors to progressing in your career and then saying, oh, actually, I want to go on the bench.
Yes. Let me tell you this. When we studied law at that time, it was unthinkable for a black person to be a judge. So in truth, when I studied law, when I decided to pursue law and graduated in law, there was no discernible ambition on my part to becoming a judge. The idea was become a lawyer, go and practice law and help people. And I mentioned an incident in which I received a distinguished African-American judge who came to visit South Africa. Who was that person? Well, as a practitioner, he visited the University of Zululand at the time, and he addressed students, law students at the University of Zululand at the time, and said, one of the things he said, one day when you are judges, they all laughed. He said to me, they laughed and laughed. And I said to people, have you lost hope? Why is it a joke that when I mention one day when you are judges, you all laugh? I'm sure I would have laughed because it was unthinkable at that time that a black person could become a judge. The point I'm making is this. As someone practicing law, going around practicing law as an attorney and even later as an advocate, I really had no ambition to be a judge. We all knew that in the then South Africa, we don't become a judge. So the idea was just to practice law, help people, ameliorate their sufferings, the situations and the like. The issue of becoming a judge really took us by surprise, if I may say so. Not that we lost hope for liberation, but there are some things we didn't expect to happen. Those ideas only came, say, after the political parties were unbent and the like, and then we're beginning to say we're looking forward to a new era. And that's really when we began to look forward to that.
We'll come back to your reflections overall in your career, some of the highlight moments in how it has changed you as an individual. Of course, in this conversation, we'll talk about how your contribution changed the law itself. But as you look at the court system in South Africa, and, we've had a recent report on court performances and there are backlogs in certain areas. There aren't enough legal minds to be able to preside over cases. And so it leads to this really tight knot of a lingering injustice in the country. Would you say, Judge Ngoepe, that there is enough support around judges to be able to execute their roles and then to make good decisions, given this high turnaround?
Much as I understand the financial constraints on the part of the government, I don't think that the judges have got enough resources to do that. They have basic resources, but a lot still need to be done. For example, I would have loved for each judge to have a properly trained researcher to assist that particular judge. You would have seen somewhere in my career that I was once a judge of an international court outside the country, where for some years, where I was even the deputy judge president of that court when I retired. We had facilities. We had researchers. We were assigned researchers, people who do proper work and properly qualified people who would have to have their master's degrees and the like to help us with some research and the like. So we don't have, in this country, we don't have resources of that nature.
And what's the immediate impact of that, would you say?
The immediate effect, it alleviates your work as a judge. And you assign people, you say, go and look into this. The advocate so-and-so raised a certain point which I think it needs to be investigated. It has some merits. Just go and check that up. And then they come back and they draft a memorandum about that particular issue. Given the workload of judges in this country, you need facilities such as those. Sometimes they don't even basic things. I remember at one time, I was thinking about it this morning. One time when I was a judge president, we ran out of stationery. We had to consider about using the reverse side of papers that had been used before. But hopefully it's not that bad. But I'm just saying that judges need some resources.
Yeah, and again, on the adverse side, that would, as you say, lead to mistakes being made. I mean, that's certainly the sense that I'm getting.
Yeah.
That if you don't have the support of that resource, you don't have the multidimensional aspect of, the implications or the applications for that law in other settings at your disposal.
Yeah.
You can make judgments that could be incorrect and the wrong judgment.
Absolutely, yes, because you didn't have, not that you are lazy, not that you lack industry or intellect, but simply because you did not have the benefit of certain facilities available to yourself.
Would you say that's a risk in our courts right now? Would you say that's happening?
No, if it is there, it will be minimal, and in any event, it will be corrected on appeal. But what I'm saying is that it would make your task easier. The backload will be alleviated.
Well, since we're talking about this now, let's talk about the higher versus the lower courts and being able to, in some cases, on matters that are taken on appeal, revise those decisions. I mean, what goes into that? I mean, what are the mechanics of making a decision that might be contrary to a decision of a lower court?
Let's take as an example a magistrate court, for example.
Yeah.
If it goes on appeal to the High Court, of course, the rule of thumb is that if a magistrate's decision has got to go on appeal to the High Court, it's not one judge. It must be two judges. Just to make sure. You can't assume that one magistrate, or one judge vis-a-vis one magistrate, one judge will always be right and the magistrate automatically wrong, simply because the magistrate vis-a-vis a judge. So, if a magistrate judgment is being appealed against, two judges must sit in it. Just, two heads are better than one. And then you've got to consider it very carefully. You don't just start with the assumption that the magistrate is wrong. You've got to consider the magistrate's reasons very carefully before you overturn. You've got to be sure that you're right before you overturn the magistrate's decision. I
mean, this might be, a silly question to ask, but I'm just curious. So, you have this magistrate who, in all conviction, learning and experience, decided this is the route to go and this is my finding, only to have it taken on appeal and then overturned by the higher court. Is there a kind of ego that happens, with the magistrates? I mean, would they be upset by that, angered by that, or is it conventional wisdom to just accept, learn, and grow from that? Is that typically what happens?
It's conventional wisdom. It's part of being a professional person to accept that you can be wrong.
Yeah.
And somebody may correct you. Nobody, I've said it many times, as humans, we are fallible. And we will keep on making mistakes, not only magistrates, but even judges themselves.
Yeah.
So you've got to accept that as part of your professional ethics, to accept that you can be wrong and somebody will correct you. But what I found to be uncomforting to magistrates is very often the language the judges would use when they overturn a magistrate judgment. I mean, nobody has ever said...
share with us. Share some anecdotes.
Nobody would ever said that. But I'm just demonstrating. I'm using a hyperbole just to demonstrate the point. You can't say, this magistrate knows nothing. I don't know which side of the road was looking. We come to this ridiculous judgment. And so you don't say that. Yeah. You actually say, this is the language we use. The learned magistrate was wrong. It may well be that this point was not well argued before him or before her. Had this point been argued as it's being argued now before us, he or she probably might have gone the other way.
Yeah. It doesn't always happen quite as respectfully and in such a collegiate way as you are describing now. I mean, we've seen, stuff go down, Judge Ngoepe, in our courts. I won't mention any particular cases because I don't want to draw you into the political arena, but we've seen disrespect, name calling. What's your assessment of, as an experienced judge, as a trailblazer, somebody who's laid that foundation, watching this kind of bad behavior?
You mean, say, for example, by legal practitioners?
Legal practitioners.
Before courts and the like.
Before court, actually sparring with the judges themselves, the judges and there's a criminal trial that we all know, it's a very famous one in South Africa, where this thing actually happened, where it seems to be that breakdown of disrespect. How do you view that?
I don't like that. I think it's very unprofessional. I think it reduces the dignity. It compromises the dignity of proceedings. I don't mind mentioning that case, for example, we talk about Advocate Tefo.
Yeah, in the sense of
yes, in that case, we are entitled to talk about it as a public issue.
Yeah.
Let me step back a bit. There was a time during our time when you're an advocate, you're not allowed to make press statements or speak to the media about the case you are handling.
Yeah.
Maybe that was old-fashioned. We liberated ourselves from that. We thought for the good. Maybe it was for the good. I don't know. And, You know, there was a time in the past when media, especially the video cameras, were not allowed inside the court. You know why? At some stage, you might think this is ridiculous, but at some stage the thought was, if we do that, there will be some advocates or practitioners who are going to play to the cameras instead of assisting the court to administer proper justice. Yeah. I leave it at that point, and I just want people to look at some of the behavior that we see in the courts and for them to ask, how valid was that fear that at some point, if we allow the media inside court, we may just reach a point where some advocates, not all of them, where some advocates, some lawyers may just, instead of assisting the court to come to justice, just play to the cameras.
It's a very, very sobering point. I'm thinking the converse in the Oscar Pistorius trial, where that allowing in of that window into the court gave people the opportunity to learn how court processes work. But what you're talking about, that risk of changing the format, the delivery, and the awareness of true justice can be affected by having external eyes. I think that's a very,
yes, it can be compromised.
Very sobering
a proper
point.
Balancing is needed.
Yeah. There's so much to get through, and I'm so conscious of the clock, and I'm having such a delicious conversation with you. But I wanted to just share, since we're talking about lawyers and so on, what is some of the worst behavior you've seen lawyers enact in your court, a court that you were presiding over?
The point that I'm making, there are instances where I became convinced that the lawyer was not assisting the court to administer justice. You know, lawyers we call them officers of the court. Why we call them officers of the court is because they've got this obligation to assist the court to administer justice. Now, there are instances where I became concerned that the lawyers were not actually assisting the court, but rather playing to the gallery.
How do you deal with it?
Well, ideally, you just report that person to the profession, to the legal profession, for them to deal with that person. One of the things that also concerned me as one aspect of playing to the gallery is the kind of language some lawyers use, inappropriate language, which they use in court, which compromises the decorum. You know, I said to you earlier on that when a judge overturns the magistrate, he will say, well, the learned magistrate was wrong. And then, of course, you also hear lawyers say, my learned friend. That is meant to convey something. That is, you treat your colleague with respect. And those are the things that are very important. But I've seen very often they are thrown out through the window by some practitioners, and it doesn't augur well for the profession.
Talking about what doesn't augur well for the profession and how these changes have happened over time and certain behaviors and practices have become more commonplace now. We've had in South Africa this move and this awareness of the imposition of Roman Dutch law, or it's been termed as an imposition, and it has informed legal systems around the world as well. A real push in the last decade or so, or perhaps even more, gaining in volume, the decolonization project. When you engage with these themes, what does the decolonization of our law mean to you?
Well, I'm not worried about the terminology. I'm not going to be bothered about whether somebody talks about decolonization, whatever, and the like. You know what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is having a proper, workable judicial system or legal system. Whether we borrowed it from our ancestors or whoever or from the Dutch, whatever, the fact of the matter is that in this country, we have an existing legal system. And we can improve it one way or the other. In improving the legal system that we have, I'm not going to use the terminology decolonize, whatever. I'm just pleading for a proper, clear, sound jurisprudence and legal system. You know, last week Friday I was addressing a function arranged by the South African Law Commission. And one of the things that I spoke about was the need to reform the law. And one of the things that I mentioned, certain caveats, certain factors which we must take into account when we reform the law, when we change the law. There are certain values that we shouldn't do away with. Laws must be acceptable to the populace. Otherwise, if you make a law that does not reflect the hopes and expectations of the people and the values they hold dear, then that law is going to be observed more by its breach than by its observance. Yeah. So I'm just saying, this is a country where you've got so many cultures that came together and so forth. For better or worse, we decided to say we form one united South Africa with a common legal system. And we just need to have a legal system that is efficient, that is workable. And I said one of the most important characteristics of a good legal system is that it must be predictable. We all must know that if you go against a red traffic light, it's an offense. It's predictable. I know if I'm going to do that, inevitably, if I go against that, I break the law. And I said, we mustn't have a legal system that changes every night. And I said, well, we mustn't have a legal system that changes like a Cape Town weather. Otherwise, you're not going to know. How are you going to plan your will?
Yeah.
For when you die, you say, when I die, I want my property to go this way and so forth. You know what enables us to do that? It's because the law is predictable.
Yeah. But is there room for innovation? And it goes back to, and I know that you want all South Africans to read the Constitution. And in fact, if we read the preamble to the Constitution, our country's priorities are summarized in there: to heal the divisions of the past, to establish a democratic society, a government based on the will of the people, and to improve the quality of life of all citizens, to build a united and democratic South Africa. Does this current format of the law suit that objective still? Can we innovate?
It does. It does. And at the same time, reminding ourselves that we are enjoined by the Constitution to develop the law and so forth and so on. I think it does. But what is important is that we need to maintain the balance. We should be careful as and when we develop the law to make sure that we don't, I said last week, we don't want to be trapped in the past by conservatism or conservative judges. But at the same time, we don't want a judge who will feel that he's so progressive and liberal that he feels that every Monday morning he must come with a groundbreaking judgment. No. We need to maintain a proper balance as we develop the law. The law must change all the time to meet changing circumstances. But let us do it in a responsible fashion, in a manner that nobody will know next month what the South African law is on a particular point. We must know. I must be able to say, when I'm no longer there, I want to write my will to leave this ABCD because the law is this. But what happens if every 12 months the law changes? We can't have that kind of situation. We must reform the law. That's the right thing to do. But we must do it with a sense of responsibility, a sense of balancing, to make sure that we have got a dependable, predictable legal system. Nobody will come and invest in a country where they say, oh, well, in that country, the law of property changes every year. You don't know. You bring $10 million to invest in South Africa. You think the law is like this. After 3 months, they say, this is no longer the law, and you lose your investment.
I mean, certainty certainly has to be, certainty, I suppose, of process is where that dependency for the pursuit of justice probably also just hinges on. We're coming towards the end of our conversation. I cannot believe how time has evaporated because there's so many more questions I would have wanted to ask you. But you have made an indelible impact on our law, and part of this conversation is about that impact. You spoke about the law, even though it is structural and architectural, it is organic in a way. It will change and move with the times as is necessary. What impacts would you say rank amongst the changes that you have made to South African law? The mark that you have left behind as legacy? Yeah,
well, as an introductory sentence, I should say to you, perhaps it's not for me to audit myself. It's that people will do that. But I need to mention some of these things because it was not for nothing that I agreed to be a judge. It was not for nothing that I decided to abandon my status as senior counsel to enjoy practicing law as senior counsel and make some bit of money, that I decided to go to agree to be a judge. I felt there was a need to go there. I felt there was a need to go and make a contribution to try and change the face of the judiciary. Well, the credibility, there's nothing more important than the credibility of a judicial system. You may have good law, the best law, best constitution. But if that good law and that good constitution is being administered by a judiciary that lacks credibility, you have nothing on your table. So the credibility of the judiciary is very important. That's one of the reasons why I went to the bench, to give it a black face as well. Later, to give it more and more black faces when I decided to become the judge president. I decided to go there to become the judge president because I had certain things in mind. If you read my book, you'll see how I was tortured during the interview, because at that time it was not acceptable that as a black person I should become a judge president. They wanted some people who had been judges president for years to continue to be judges president. But there was a reason for that, and the reason was, by the way, I was the only one black judge at the time in Pretoria and Joburg. I think there was only one other black judge when I was interviewed for the position of judge president. And I was one of those people who felt, no, we must change the face of the judiciary, otherwise it won't be credible. And that's why I decided to become judge president, in the course of which I tried to bring in as many black faces and women as possible. There was not a single woman judge, white or black. After some time, having been judge president for some time and tried to recruit people, train people, bring the black faces and women, I reached a point where more than 50% of the judges in Pretoria and Joburg were black. And I said to people, I've achieved my objective, and I'm leaving. I have not reached compulsory retirement, but my objective to become judge president has been achieved. I've brought in more than 50% are black. So what is there for me to do? And I decided to leave. They thought I wouldn't, and I left.
Certainly something to be proud of.
The point is, you change the law and the credibility of the law and judicial system. That's what I thought, by making the judiciary reflect the composition of our country.
Yeah.
And if I were to put some modesty aside,
please do,
and you repeat the question to me, what contribution do you think you have made? I would say, this is the contribution that I made by changing the face of the judiciary in the area.
Any judgments in particular that you would like to share as highlight accomplishments for yourself?
Not too many, because, most of the time as judge president, you don't sit in court. There are certain things that just preoccupy you. But there was one case which was about eviction. Not eviction as such. Actually, the farmer was refusing a family to bury a dead member of their family on a farm where there are about two other graves. And they didn't succeed. They went to the High Court. They failed. And the matter came on appeal still in the High Court before the full bench. I sat in that case myself as judge president with two other judges. And those two other judges were not of the same color with me, and maybe that, I don't know, it could have affected maybe the way they saw things for the better. They saw things better than I saw them. And my view was that they must be entitled to bury that person because they had a belief, their own traditional belief, that this person, in terms of their religious belief, must rest there with the other families. It didn't weigh enough with the other judges. They said no. And I said, no. In my view, I'm weighing these. This guy has got a farm of so many hectares, and this grave is just 1 meter by 2 meters. That's not going to damage his right of ownership of property that much. I said, no, they must be allowed to do that. But I lost because I was the minority. But later on, I understand. I don't know the details. I think the government, they might have read my minority judgment and changed the law a bit, improved the law to bring a little bit more in line with my minority judgment. And then we had a number of cases about people wanting to bury on the farm, that sort of thing. And I think if I didn't persuade too many people, if I didn't influence legislation in that direction, then at least I brought the topic to discussion.
Is there anything you regret about the way that your career evolved and some of the choices that you made?
I think maybe in some instances, I feel maybe I could have been more robust, but then I was constrained because I was the judge president. But sometimes I would feel, I could sit if I wish I could have time to sit in a case, but then I wouldn't. And I'm sorry that I couldn't sit in that case. I remember at one time I decided as the judge president to say, I'm going on circuit. You know, when you go on circuit, you go to Palabora and the like and so forth. And I said, I'm going on circuit as the judge president. Because there are people in Polokwane, people in Palabora, They had never seen a black judge. And I said, I'm going to allocate myself as a black judge to go on circuit so that people who have never seen a black judge should do so. You know, there are people who were dying to see a black judge in their lifetime, like, you know, the story of people read the Bible say, there was the story of this old man, Simeon, who said, after seeing Jesus Christ, he said, Lord, you can let me die now because I've seen the Messiah. So I said, well, there were too many people in this country who were eager just to see a black judge.
And they need to see themselves reflected in justice.
Yes.
You know?
And I said to them, if they could just, those old people and women out in the rural areas, if they could see a black judge, they would say, now we can die. We are happy we have seen a black judge in this country. Yeah. I wish I could have divided myself into many judges. I could be everywhere.
Well, you know, when Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela died, they said, you know, she didn't die, she multiplied. And I think you didn't only serve, you've multiplied in a sense. And that's kind of the note that I want to leave our little chat on. And again, I just can't believe it's over. I haven't even asked you half the things I wanted to. Is this delicious prospect. And some people might not see it as a delicious prospect because it's so arduous. There's many years of study involved. There's some of the powerlessness, I think, that you felt that a lot of them might still feel in entering the profession. But if you were to issue a rousing call for more people to follow, not only in your footsteps, but in other judges who we're going to be interviewing in the series, to do something about our legal justice system and to make it more accessible and to allow people to feel as if this is going to be the final arbiter and they have recourse in a society where so many feel so helpless. What would you say? What would you share with those young minds in pursuing this profession and pursuing this path?
Two people who read my book came back to say, had I read this book while I was younger, I'd probably have been a better person now. And I think that people should say to themselves that nothing should really stop me from becoming what I want to become. There are serious challenges, but those challenges perhaps need to be there in order to enable us as humans to learn the ability to dig deep, to realize that, in fact, we do have some depth. Let them exist, those obstacles. I'm saying to them, you'll find some challenges, you'll find some obstacles, but let them not deter you from doing what you want to become. And I said, well, at some point I thought, when I decided to take a particular direction, I created an alternative way in case I failed. I said, perhaps I shouldn't have created plan B, you know. Just have plan A and say, well, plan A is plan A, I'm going to succeed. Why should I even have plan B? Just have plan A and feel driven to achieve what I want to achieve. And let nothing stop you.
So as the young people do, let's fist pump.
Sure.
Thank you for talking to us today. And, you know, you've mentioned your book a few times, and I really think it is such a wonderful resource to go back and look at even the unexpected support that you received from your white legal counterparts. Well, they weren't your legal counterparts at the time. They were your superiors in those law firms. And just this really interesting, complicated, in some places really painful journey that you went on to become who you are and to have left the legacy that you have left in South Africa. We thank you on behalf of our audience for your service, Judge Ngoepe. You've left an indelible mark on the legal landscape in South Africa. Thank you for being a constant voice of guidance, a voice of sanity and reason in times where things seem so dark, both literally and philosophically. So we really just want to appreciate you today.
Thank you much. And I hope the young people, and perhaps even not so young people who happen to have the time to look through that book, I hope they'll find some things which they'll find useful. And I felt that I should look to the past for the reason that I believe the past is a solid guidance because nobody can change the past. I use the past as a point of reference because I know that you can never change the past. And that is why my book reflects on the past. It reflects on something that none of us can change.
But as a lodestar to what we can do to alter a repeat of that reality in future. Yes. Always fascinating talking to you, and I hope that our paths cross again. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Legal Luminaries, a Jackpot original podcast. by Juta and Jacaranda FM. I'm Iman Rappetti. Find more episodes at jacarandafm.com. Just click on Jackpod.